Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Debbie Georgatos. I love substitute hosting on Point of View Radio. So happy you're tuned in this afternoon. We have a great show lined up. Top stories of the day. We're going to be talking about all of them today, and along with some experts who can really help us understand them. We'll be talking about the caravan that went through Mexico and presented themselves at the southern border, and what America's asylum law says. For that segment, we have Mark Krikorian joining us at 12:30, and we're going to be talking about the revelation involving the Iranians having lied about developing nuclear weapons. Talking about that in the 1 o'clock hour, we have Claire Lopez, probably the premier national expert on Iranian policy and defense policy on that subject. She's with Center for Security Policy. And then we have at 2:30, Peter Brooks of the Heritage Foundation is going to join us to talk about what we're watching in North Korea and the North Korean just amazing developments in the last week. But I want to start out, first of all, welcome you to Point of View. Thank you so much for listening. If you are interested in calling in to Point of View during our show, our number is 1-800-351-1212. Love taking callers. Happy to talk with you. And also want to encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. At pointofview.net, you can look at past shows. You can read, you can listen to past shows. You can see the bios about the guests we're going to have on today and some links to the stories we'll be talking about. Love to have you all feeling informed and connected relating to the stories we're going to be talking about. Well, I do want to start also, and again, I'm Debbie Georgatos, filling in for Kirby Anderson on Point of View. I wanted to mention, of course, today is National Day of Prayer, and if in any show that should be acknowledged, it's right here on Point of View. I thought it might be interesting to share with you the people who are behind the National Day of Prayer. There are literally thousands of gatherings around America today, including in Washington, D.C., celebrating the National Day of Prayer, participating in Prayer for America. And the 2 points I wanted to share with you, one is we can never be grateful enough in America to live in a country that started at its inception, at its roots, including in the First Amendment to the Constitution, the actual promise of freedom of religion, the idea from the Declaration of Independence that we all have rights from God, that they are rights we have simply because we were born, that the entire purpose of government is not to control society, it is to provide protection for individuals living in freedom under a system established, and that we, the people, can vote in, participate in. And the precious religious freedom we have in America is one of the main topics we talk about in this show, Point of View, every week. We talk about the challenges resolving issues facing America today and how those issues should be resolved, consistent with a commitment to honoring religious freedom in America. So that was the first point, just what precious, wonderful country we live in America, and how grateful we need to be, and just how fortunate we are to live in a country committed to the freedom of religion under the First Amendment. And that is not the case in many, many countries around the world. The other thing I want to share specifically about today, the National Day of Prayer, are the 4 prayer priorities that were put out on the website by the people who are behind the National Day of Prayer. And I'm just going to mention them to you briefly. The 4 prayer priorities. Number 1, asking God to bless the United States of America, that petitionary prayer, that asking for God's blessing on this country, and the idea of America, as we've talked about in this show and on my radio show, which I'll tell you more about in a moment, but the idea of preserving and protecting America, a unique, extraordinary country committed to the freedom and to protecting the God-given freedom each individual has. So goal number one, or prayer priority number one, asking God to bless the United States of America. Number two, praying for unity in America. And, this one, they underneath each of these, in fact, I'm not sure this is on the pointofview.net website, but if you just Google National Day of Prayer, you can find their website, and they list these 4 priorities. But the second one is about praying for unity in America. Under each of these, they give some bullet points. And, and they have a quote from Ephesians, which is making every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of grace. That beautiful passage from Ephesians, praying for unity in America. And, I would add to that unity based on, founded on, growing out of the biblical principles behind America and simply the conservative values that founded this country. Unity around the right ideas. Number 3, pray for the centers of influence in America. And, they also, as I say, they list all the bullet points. They have a connection to 1 Timothy. Beneath this one, they pray for the centers of influence in America. And from 1 Timothy, first of all, then I urge that petitions, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for everyone, for kings and all those who are in authority, so that we may lead a tranquil and quiet life in all godliness and dignity. So, and they list some points underneath, more specific points for prayer, or targets or goals in our prayer. The fourth one is asking God for the National Day of Prayer on Thursday, May 3rd, to become a catalytic spiritual movement across America, asking God for the energy, the grace, the strength to move this National Day of Prayer into a more profound and daily carrying on of our commitment to prayer. And that one, from Acts 1, they quote, "They all were continually united in prayer." So this is the National Day of Prayer, and honestly, there are things going on in Washington. It's really been to give credit to the people who are working to promote the National Day of Prayer. In Washington, it is more and more honored each year. And by that, I mean there are crowds that go to various events, but there are also members of our Congress, United States House, United States Senate, the President, all sorts of leadership, religious organizations around America, churches, of various kinds of churches, various Christian churches, all coming together, and actually members of the Jewish faith also, all coming together to celebrate this National Day of Prayer, and to give it a prominent place in Washington is a signal in America of the return to respect for the founding values of America that include this just impossibly important commitment to the freedom of religion. In fact, First Liberty, which is based here in Dallas and which has advocates around the country on behalf of people in schools and employment situations of all kinds for religious liberty, and advocates on behalf of people when their religious liberty is threatened. They often point out that the name the First Liberty comes because that's the first liberty mentioned in the First Amendment. So, this is a great day to celebrate the presence of God in America, the power of prayer, our freedom to pray, our freedom to practice our religion. So, again, I want to give the phone number. I'm going to turn, when we come back from this upcoming break, I'm going to turn to talking about this caravan of people coming through Mexico and coming up to the southern border. And before I get my our expert on today, Mark Krikorian from the Center for Immigration Studies, I want to tell you some things I'm sure you didn't know about who is funding this group, what kinds of political leanings are being embraced by the people who are funding this caravan group. So there's a lot you need to learn. And the last few seconds, I just want to let you know that while I love doing Point of View, I'm happy to join the roundtable or substitute host when Kirby is gone. I have my own radio show. And if you're watching this show today on Facebook, I put my radio show out also on Facebook Live. My show is called America Can We Talk? It's every Sunday evening from 6 to 8 p.m. Central Time. And on Facebook, we go right out on Facebook, just like this show, as well as, of course, on radio. So come right back. We're going to talk about that caravan from Mexico. You won't believe we don't know.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Graham Wood gives us a chilling picture of what Islamic jihadists are really like. His new book, The Way of the Strangers, Encounters with the Islamic State, is the result of years of interviewing ISIS members. It is amazing that he was allowed to interview them and that they didn't consider killing him or holding him for ransom. Those who he interviewed were called the strangers. When he asked them why they called themselves that, they said that that was a saying that the Prophet Muhammad gave them. Islam began as something strange and will return to being strange according to their theology. And it's that last point that I want to discuss. Rachel Martin of NPR's Morning Edition asked Graham Wood about his belief that many in the West misunderstand the religious roots of ISIS. Since he has interviewed many of them over the last few years, his answer is important for us to hear. He agrees that there is a strong urge to say that Islam has nothing to do with religion, that ISIS is a bunch of psychopaths, people with blades cutting off heads wantonly. Unfortunately, that's just not true. ISIS has looked into Islamic history with historical accuracy, with intellectual vigor. I hope that these new faces that will be placed in the Defense Department and the Department of Homeland Security begin to understand the religious roots of the Islamic jihadist. It has been fashionable to say that Muslim terrorism is a deviation from Islam and not representative of the religion. That may be so, but it does not mean that we should ignore the reason that these jihadists desire to kill innocents and bring down the Western world. Religion plays a much more important part in their actions than many in the current positions of leadership are willing to acknowledge. Graham Wood spent years trying to understand ISIS and the fighters for the Islamic State. Our leaders need to read his book and understand the motivation for these jihadists. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm Debbie Georgatos. Just love filling in for Kirby Anderson today. As I mentioned at the start of the show, we're going to hit three of the biggest news stories in America during this next now 2.5 hours, or more than that. One being the caravan of people coming through Mexico, presenting themselves at the southern U.S. border, demanding admission and asylum. We're going to turn to that in this hour. We're also going to talk about Iran and the speech by the Israeli President Netanyahu, or I guess Prime Minister, which title he has, which was where he was saying that Mossad had actually been able to break into and steal many documents from Iran, proving that Iran's been lying for years and years about the nuclear weapons program. That's the second hour. What does America do about that? What does the world do about that? What does that mean for the Iranian deal? Then third hour, we're going to talk about North Korea and the stunning developments there with Peter Brooks, expert from the Heritage Foundation. Before we get our expert on this hour, and again, I encourage you to call in. The number to call in is 1-800-351-1212. That's the number here at Point of View. Love talking with you. Also urge you to go to the pointofview.net website, and you can read along or see some of the articles we'll be talking about. I want to hit two basic points in this segment before we get Mark Krikorian on. The first is this. The way the media and many in America, the media presents the issue with respect to these migrants coming through, and they're from Honduras and other countries that are impoverished, that don't obviously have the abundance and security and stability that America has. But these people coming through Mexico and coming to the southern border, and they're not really coming asking for asylum, they're coming demanding asylum. And asylum is different from a refugee. And an asylee is different than a refugee. And I'm going to tell you just a touch about that, what the difference is. But then I want to really hit on who is funding these groups. It's really, really important for America to make the right answer, the right decision on how to deal with these groups. We have to start with understanding what's behind them, because the picture the media presents is these are just, impoverished, hapless, barely can survive, making their way here in a desperate, flight toward freedom and flight toward prosperity in America. And this is a grossly misleading presentation by the media. Obviously, many of these people coming through South America, through Mexico from South America, coming to America's border, they don't live as well as Americans. They do live in countries more impoverished. But I just want to share with you some of the thinking behind it, because it impacts how we should deal with that. There's one organization called, and I'm not a Spanish speaker, so pardon me for my obviously mispronunciation, but Pueblos Sin Fronteras, which stands for People Without Borders. That's one overarching group behind this move toward bringing these people into America. There's also a group called CARA, C-A-R-A. C-A-R-A is made up of four groups, which include the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, the American Immigration Council, the Refugee and Immigration Center for Education and Legal Services, and the American Immigration Lawyers Association. So if you happen to keep up with those names, it makes the acronym CARA. The relevance of that, I'm getting to the relevance, I promise. The relevance is that 3 of those 4 groups are funded by George Soros. If you don't remember who George Soros is, his last name is S-O-R-O-S. You ought to Google his name, understand who he is. His organization, Open Society. He's a radical activist. He is among the world's wealthiest people. He's a billionaire many times over. He deplores America. He hates he hates religion. He hates America. He hates the idea of borders. He spends his money advocating for the views he holds, which is essentially getting rid of borders and national identity, and also getting rid of the role that religion plays in America. So other liberal groups behind this, before I get to the really sinister part, include the MacArthur Foundation, Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation. And so all of these groups, many of them have connections to George Soros. And so those groups, funded by a guy who hates America, hates the national identity of America, hates the idea of a country having an identity separate from the rest of the world, and in particular dislikes America. So that guy is funding these groups. These groups, I mentioned all those groups, Without Borders, People Without Borders, the CARA organizations funded by Soros, they are funding these refugees. It's a very different picture, because it begins to be a clearer picture that this is not people pouring in out of just being desperate and destitute. This is an invasion. This is a decision by people. We're going to, and you read or hear about the demands that they are making. They're not coming to America saying, we sure hope you guys will give us asylum because we would really like to live here. They're demanding asylum. And in fact, the Refugee Caravan, put out a press release in which they describe their goal and who they are. It's a short press release. Here's what it said. We are a group of people from different nations, religions, genders, gender expressions, and sexual orientations, migrating and seeking refuge. We seek to become one collective, supporting each other shoulder to shoulder, and demonstrating that by uniting, we can abolish borders. If a country doesn't have borders, it isn't a country. It's just a particular place on the globe. It's just a random piece of dirt on the planet Earth. This is who is behind this. This is the thinking behind this. And I want to quickly tell you the difference between refugees and asylum, because it matters as to the legal definition of how we deal with this. Refugees are people who stay in the country they're from, but they apply to become refugees. They go through America has refugee laws. We try to apply them. We bring groups here. We've agreed ahead of time that you can become a refugee. You can come here as a refugee, and there's a set of laws that deal with those people. Asylum is a different thing. Asylum is the set of laws that apply to people who have crossed into America, made their way here somehow, and now that they're here, they're asking to stay. They're asking for asylum. They already are here. Refugees are still in their home country making the application refugee. That's the first part. Very different in the way, because the goal of these people pushing in from the southern border is they want to say, we're already in the country. We want asylum. Well, America has asylum laws, and that's what we're going to be talking about with Mark Krikorian in the next segment from the Center for Immigration Studies. But our asylum law requires very specific. You have to fall in a very specific category. You can't just wander in from anywhere and seek asylum. You have to be demanding, or you have to show that you are under threat in the country you're from. This is from the Immigration and Nationality Act, Section 208. You must establish, I have a prima facie case establishing that race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion was or will be a central reason that you are in serious risk of persecution in the country you're from. It does not include people coming here because they are the victim of domestic violence. It doesn't include people, all sorts of reasons you don't like the country you're from. Poverty is not a reason that you can be granted asylum. Under the 8 years of President Obama, we weakened the application of those laws, but those laws are actually in place, and there are many options that President Trump has available to him to decide how to deal with these people at the border, and which include having his own, the executive branch sending down their federal agents and interviewing these people and hearing. And it is not a mass group law. It is applied to each person who comes here. What country are you from? What is the reason you are claiming that you fall in one of these categories? And I really want to push with Mark Krikorian to ask, what does membership in a particular social group mean? Does that mean we'll have to ask him. But there are choices that President Trump has available to him to not have these people come here, give them temporary asylum, await a hearing for a court. And right now, just so the asylum courts, because the law was applied in such a lax way for the past 8 years, such a lax way under President Obama, there are now 311,000 asylum claims that are backlogged in America's courts. And the Department of Homeland Services doesn't have the money, the prosecutors, the ability to process all these. So we already have an overload of asylum. On the other hand, in this last 30 seconds, I will tell you I'm very aware of both of the passages in Hebrews and Deuteronomy in the Bible that encourage us to embrace strangers, to care for strangers. I'm also well aware of the passage in the story of Nehemiah about Nehemiah built a wall because, as he told people, you don't have any right to be here. Your people, in fact, you have no portion or right or claim to Jerusalem, he said to Jerusalem's enemies. So that's our job, figuring out who these people are and what is in America's best interests. It's Debbie Georgatos, filling in a point of view. Come right back.
Imagine you work where you know people do not share your faith, and they certainly don't agree with a Christian view of life and culture. You are surrounded by hostility every single day. How important would it be to have solid information to back you up? Jim in South Carolina listens to Point of View in the afternoons. He writes, I teach in a public secular university and enjoy actually being a voice for the biblical Christian worldview in a liberal setting. Thank you for your ministry. Thank you for being bold and proclaiming truth. And Jim finishes, I pray for you daily. Jim works in hostile territory, and he prays for Point of View because Point of View is a source of truth. Please help us continue being here for Jim and everyone else. We need you to visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151 and join the Truth Team. Enable us to be here each day by giving each month. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm Debbie Georgatos, happily filling in for Kirby Anderson on Point of View. And as I mentioned before our break, we have joining us this segment Mark Krikorian, and he is the Executive Director of the Center for Immigration Studies. And I've had him on my radio show, too, in the past, my radio show being America Can We Talk? But it's just great to have him here because this story about the caravan of people coming through Mexico up to the southern border, presenting themselves asking/demanding for asylum, it's really important for everyone to understand, what choices do we have? Who are these people? But what choices do we have as Americans who want to preserve our country? So Mark Krikorian, in addition to being the executive director of Center for Immigration Studies, nationally recognized expert, testifies in Congress all the time, writes for all the major publications. I mean, he's a nationally recognized expert. I'm so glad to have him. So welcome, Mark.
Well, glad to be here.
So here we talked before the break about the people presenting themselves at the southern border, this caravan of people coming through Mexico. So if you would just kind of lay out, I know these people are talking about seeking asylum versus refugees. So can you talk a little bit about what it means to seek asylum?
Well, asylum and refugee status are kind of the same thing. The difference is a refugee under our law is someone that we picked out abroad in a refugee camp and brought here on our own volition. Somebody seeking asylum is a person who either came in as a visitor or came in illegally and then says, hey, you have to give me refugee status. In other words, we don't make the decision. They make the decision about whether they're going to present themselves. That's what asylum is. And so these people are seeking asylum. This caravan has been going on for a few years, but it was always just in Mexico, kind of a protest demonstration thing. This time, they decided they were going to try to basically storm our borders the way we saw in Germany a couple of years ago. Remember when Angela Merkel said any refugee wanted to come in, she'd take, and 1 million people showed up like in a matter of months. Yep. She should have expected anything else. The good news is, what started as a group of 1,500 people has basically boiled down to only about 150 people once they got to Tijuana across from San Diego, because some of them have been deported by the Mexican government, because Mexico is, in fact, deporting more Central American illegals than it used to. Some of them decided it wasn't worth it. They just asked for asylum in Mexico because Mexico has signed all the refugee treaties. It has an asylum system, and, they speak the same language. I mean, the economy isn't as good as here, but, if you're from Honduras, it's way better than Honduras. So basically it was whittled down. There's 150 left, and they didn't go to Texas, South Texas, which is where they would have gone. It's much closer to Central America. I was just there last week, and there's most of the illegals they catch are Central Americans down there. They went an extra 1,000 miles to California, basically for two reasons. One, the media market is bigger. Los Angeles, San Diego are going to get a lot of news media. South Texas is hours from the closest of anything. So that's number one. Number two, they wanted to get into the Ninth Circuit, the federal courts, because that's the most liberal, most anti-constitution, anti-enforcement part of the federal judiciary. So they've done that, and the way it works is they aren't sneaking across the border. I mean, some of them seem to be trying that, but the ones that are in the news, we're seeing, TV coverage and everything, those people are literally just waiting in line at the legal crossing point. It's called a port of entry. That's what they call it. They're just waiting in line, and when they get up to the head of the line, they say, hi, we want to apply for asylum, or I fear persecution, or whatever. And we're required by law to at least consider whether their application or their fear is credible. They call it a credible fear interview. In other words, are they just making this up, or is there something to it? They don't actually apply yet, but they have this first cut. The thing is that, and so let me just bring you up to date that between a third and a half of that group that finally made it to Tijuana have already been let in and are having this interview. Hopefully they're going to detain all of them, hold them in detention until they make a decision, because that's the key thing. The reason people are doing this is not because they're going to get asylum. They all know they're not going to get it. We know they're not going to get it. We know they know they're not going to get it. Everybody knows they're not going to get asylum because they simply do not have any credible grounds for it. Yes, it's poor. Yes, it's violent. Yes, there's crime. None of those is a ground for asylum.
Well, that's
the reason they're doing it is to get into the country, get a court date, and then hopefully be released, and then they'll disappear. That's the whole strategy here. And we can confound that by detaining every single one of them until their case is heard. And then if they win, they're free to go. If not, we put them on a plane as quickly as possible and send them back.
Do we have facilities in place along the border to detain a group of people like this?
Not nearly enough, but because we do have detention facilities, but we don't have nearly enough for the flow overall. But I think what you're going to see is that this caravan, this basically 150 people or so, have gotten so much attention that I think they're going to make sure that every one of them is deported, even if that means some other illegals not deported, but detained, held in a detention center, even if some other people who would otherwise have been detained aren't, because it is essential that Central America get the message this isn't going to work. Because if they get the opposite message, you're going to see exactly the same thing you saw in Germany with Angela Merkel.
You know what? That was just a fabulous summary of the whole situation. I love it. I want to go back and talk. I mentioned before the break, before you came on, that Section 208 of the Immigration Nationality Act that spells out the asylum standards. There's one provision. It says essentially the asylum applicant has to show race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion was or will be a central reason for persecution. My question is this. The term membership in a particular social group and fearing persecution because of your membership in that group, that seems really vague and broad. What kind of things qualify?
Yeah, it is. It's a catch-all for anything any judge wants to make up. And that language is taken directly from the refugee treaties. There's one in 1951, one in 1967. So that's verbatim from the treaties. The other four, in other words, race, religion, nationality, political opinion, yeah, you sort of get that. I mean, that's all obvious. Particular social group was a catch-all for anybody that that it wasn't covered by these other groups. The problem is what it's turned into is a loophole for left-wing judges, anti-borders judges, to make up anything they want. So a particular social group, instead of what it was originally conceived of, something like, say, monarchists or members of the former aristocracy in, Tsarist Russia. They didn't have a political opinion. It wasn't religious. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just that they were targeted for that reason. Well, they've now turned that, or these judges, our judges, have now turned this into anything they want. Well, women who, want more, more modern lifestyle and don't want their husband telling them what to do. That becomes a particular social group. Anything. In fact, Justice Alito of the Supreme Court has written in a decision basically saying exactly what you said, is that this, we could just make up anything. Any group of more than one person, two people or more, we can just make up as a particular social group, and that's not like fear-mongering. That's exactly what judges have been doing, which is one of the reasons, at the very least, particular social group has to be defined much more tightly, and frankly, I would prefer it just to be removed from the law altogether. Yeah, but that would take Congress to get off its behind and do something, and they're barely able to pass a budget, quite honestly. So
I noticed that.
But it's an interesting thing, that I was referring earlier to that first cut interview. It's called a credible fear interview, and that doesn't mean you get asylum. It just means if you pass, you're allowed to then apply for asylum. The key thing that I think we can change, and that's something the administration should be able to do, I think maybe they're worried about lawsuits, but I think they should do it anyway, is to say that if you came through another country where you could have applied for asylum but didn't, that is on its face evidence that you don't have a credible fear of persecution. Because if you did, you would seek asylum in the first place you weren't being persecuted. These people have gone through 2,000 miles of Mexico, and the ones who reached California have chosen not to seek asylum in Mexico, probably because they have illegal alien relatives here that they want to join.
Absolutely. We're speaking with Mark Krikorian of the Center for Immigration Studies. We do have to go off to a break. When we get back from the break, I want to talk with him about, there is apparently some discussion in Congress about redoing the asylum law. Like, what should we do about this? In addition to what you just said, how do we tailor it down? And then I also want to talk a little bit more about how America ultimately sends the message this cannot continue. Debbie Georgatos, Point of View. Be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Accabono Brake Corporation hired Clintoria Burnett in 2014 at one of its South Carolina automotive brake manufacturing locations as a temporary worker. Burnett is an adherent to the Apostolic Faith Church of God in True Holiness. Her faith requires that she cannot wear pants, and even since she was a small child, she has worn only skirts and dresses. When Burnett received the offer for the job of washer inspector, she was wearing an ankle-length skirt. When she was told that she would have to wear pants to perform her job, the company withdrew their offer of employment. According to the complaint filed by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the company failed to engage in any form of interactive process regarding a religious accommodation for Burnett, and failed to consider any potential accommodation of Burnett's religious beliefs. Once an employer knows of an employee's religion, it is required by law to at least make an effort to accommodate or demonstrate why such an accommodation would work an undue hardship upon the business. Companies often have difficulty staffing positions, and safety regulations can make that task even more difficult. Yet it is vital that companies maintain our national commitment to religious liberty and human dignity by at least trying to find a way to accommodate an employee's religious liberty at the job site. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. We're speaking today with Mark Krikorian, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Immigration Studies. Our topic is a group of people coming through Mexico and presenting themselves at the southern border. I want to go back to one thing you said, Mark, because it was really a great point I hadn't thought about, that these individuals did not present themselves at the Texas border, where any application and process through our appellate courts would go through. I can't remember. Texas is Sixth Circuit, I think. Whatever it is.
I think it's the Fifth. Yeah.
Fifth, yeah. I was just quizzing you. I knew that. Not really. Anyway, but the Ninth Circuit, California, is, everyone knows, the very, very liberal Ninth Circuit. Well, it's very interesting because these people are portrayed in the media as, and they are coming from countries where there's great poverty, but they didn't figure that out on their own. We were talking before you came on about the groups backing this. The one group that is the English name for it is essentially advocating for the end of eliminating borders. It's People Without Borders and all sorts of groups that are funding this, helping this, and encouraging this. I mean, that information comes from them. So it's a pretty savvy thing to do, to seek the Ninth Circuit on the appellate court on the way up. So if you have any comment about that before I go.
Sure, yeah, no, absolutely, because what that really highlights is that this is an orchestrated stunt. The Hondurans, most of them, they're just regular people. They're gonna, if they end up getting in, they're dishwashers, landscaping, that kind of stuff. In other words, they're regular folks. The people organizing this group that you referred to, which in English is People Without Borders, is a California-based anti-borders organization. They're the ones who've orchestrated the whole thing. They're the ones who've engineered it, told them where to go. They've brought in immigration lawyers to coach them about what words they're supposed to use when they get to the border, that sort of thing. So, the illegal aliens themselves, it's like, I mean, they're human beings. They're responsible for their actions, but they're kind of being used here by the anti-borders radicals who have engineered this as a challenge to American sovereignty, basically trying to throw it into our face so that if they succeed, not 150, but 1,500 and 15,000, et cetera, people will follow them. That's the point, is to overwhelm. It's a Cloward Piven strategy,
Absolutely,
as they call it
it
in
is.
the old days.
Yep.
Overwhelm the system.
Absolutely, it is. And I mentioned earlier, and I wanted to just tell you again, there was a press release put out by this group in March called the Refugee Caravan, which they ended it with. We seek to become one collective, supporting each other shoulder to shoulder and demonstrating that by uniting we can abolish borders. And so this is a real challenge, a real threat to say, America, you might think you have immigration laws and border security and that you have sovereignty, but this is and several of the groups behind this and funding this are funded by George Soros, which we can't go off on him today, although I have gone off many times on him. But Mark, what is the answer for Congress? You see what is happening. So there's an orchestrated invasion, an orchestrated stunt. What should Congress do with our asylum laws?
There's a couple things they need to do. More generally, for both asylum and regular illegal immigration, Congress needs to approve more funding for detention of illegal immigrants so that the Immigration Service isn't forced to just let them go with a summons hoping they come back, the honor system, basically. And Congress, in this most recent funding bill, what was that, a month ago, when it was in the news, they specifically chose not to give the administration its requested increase in funding. So part of it is just practical. They need more space. Whether they build a building or they rent space in a county jail, whatever it is, they need somewhere to hold people so that if they get a negative decision one way or other, they actually know where they are and they can return them. Otherwise, they have to send them a letter, say, please show up with your bags. We want to deport you on Tuesday. Nobody ever shows up. It's called a run letter or, is the sort of nickname. When they send the letter out, you run. But more basically with regard to asylum law itself, the basic principle that we need to have in law is what's called safe third country. And what that means is, we were talking about this before the break, if you have passed through a country where you're not being persecuted and that has an asylum system, you have to apply there. If you didn't, you're not even allowed to apply in the United States. You may or may not have a good case, but you shouldn't even be allowed to apply. And that is relevant to more than just the Mexico border, because we get all kinds of people flying in from European airports, people from Africa, the Middle East, wherever it is. They're getting on, Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris or Frankfurt or Heathrow or whatever, and they're coming to the United States, and then they're claiming asylum. It's like, wait a minute, you were in a, developed, free country. You weren't being persecuted there. The immediate response should be, you don't even get to apply. We're not making a decision. You may be, maybe you warrant asylum. More power to you. Good luck to you. Turn around and get back on that plane. You got no business even asking us for asylum. Because, look, if you're drowning, you're going to grab for whatever life preserver is closest at hand or whatever rowboat. I mean, you're not going to be picky. But if you're choosing, to flee, there was a woman, this is years ago, she was from, I forget what African country it was, and then she went to Ghana. And then she was there for a while, and then went to Germany, and she was there for a while, and then came to the United States and said, I want asylum. It's like, well, what is your problem? I mean, asylum is not just a means of reuniting with your relatives. If you have to have a cousin in the United States and that's where you want to live, it's fleeing persecution. If you're not applying in the first safe country you reach, you are not actually seeking asylum. You're just a regular economic migrant. And so that needs to be enshrined in law, and that's something only Congress can do.
Love that, because they're country shopping. Like the people forum shopping in the Ninth Circuit, these are country shopping. Okay, one last thing I want to be sure we understand, which is, what is the relationship between asylum status, if you achieve asylum status, and citizenship in America with a right to vote?
When you get asylum, it's like when a person is brought here as a refugee. For 1 year, you're under that status. It's a special particular thing. After 1 year, you're required, literally required by law, to convert that into a regular green card, which is lawful permanent residence, which can lead to citizenship. So after a year, you get a green card, which are green again now. And what that means is after 4 more years, because they count the 1 year you were under asylum toward the 5-year total clock you have to have here before you can apply for citizenship. So after the 5 years are up, you can apply for citizenship. You have to take a pretty elementary test. I used to teach citizenship classes, and, they can't be PhD dissertations. We're talking about regular, simple people, but I think the test is a little too easy. But the point is, after the 5 years, and not everybody does it, some people wait 6, 7, 8, whatever it is, you become a citizen, you take the test, become a citizen, get sworn in, and only then can you vote, or at least only then can you legally vote. So there's a number of years between it, but it's not that many years, and the hurdles really aren't that high.
So you do have, though, an automatic path on an asylum after you're an automatic path to getting a green card. That's not an application, right? That's you get the green card after a year of behaving yourself.
I think you file the paperwork, but you do it anyway. Yeah, it's basically automatic. Yes.
Okay, Mark Krikorian, you are just a fount of knowledge. I'm so glad. I will tell listeners I happened to get to meet Mark Krikorian in person at some conference, and just so enjoyed meeting him and love having you on my show. I thank you so much for joining us on Point of View today.
Thank you, Debbie.
Okay, folks, I do want to keep on this topic a little more after the top of the hour break and tell you again, our caller line is 1-800 or just 800-351-1212. I'd love to talk with you about how you feel about how America should address this, changes in the law. I'm so grateful that we were able to have Mark Krikorian, a true expert, join us. And after the break, we'll be talking about that, and we're leading on to our next topic, which is Iran. Lots of big news. Can't wait to talk to you. Debbie Georgatos, Point of View.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
Well, hello there and welcome. I'm Debbie Georgatos, filling in for Kirby Anderson. How fun is this? I love every time I get to do it at Point of View. Our call-in number for our guests is 800-351-1212. We had on the last hour, we talked a lot about the caravan of Hondurans and other non-Americans making their way through South America. Making their way through Mexico from South America and presenting themselves at the American border seeking asylum. And, this is I'm very, very glad we had such a good expert join us, Mark Krikorian of the Center for Immigration Studies. And one reason I really wanted to harp on this story a little bit today is that, if we had, for example, ISIS at the border, we had someone we knew was an enemy or some other sworn enemy, some other group of jihadists or any foreign enemy, we would know to repel them. We would know to fight back. But this is a manipulative thing that has been occurring and was described very well by Mark Krikorian, that this group of people has been making its way through South America. It's diminished in size. Through Mexico, it's diminished in size a certain degree. But this is funded and paid for by left-wing forces in America, and as well as George Soros, who's, just a massive left-wing force in the world, but funded by left-wing organizations that simply have as a goal to abolish borders, to destroy the idea of an American, meaning United States of America, American culture, American country, American set of laws, the whole idea of the identity of America as a country. And if you don't like those ideas, which many on the left don't, this is a vehicle, a way they have chosen to try to flaunt America's system, to dare America. They've tried to create this image of this caravan of people coming up from South America through Mexico. Tried to portray them as just, hapless victims of poverty and from horrible circumstances, and trying to make America look heartless and unkind, not to immediately embrace them. I think what's great, and I think because it's been getting such attention for quite a while now, I think there are many Americans alert and wide awake and saying and recognizing, wait a minute, this isn't what we think, what it looks like. This isn't good. We don't just surrender America's. We don't offer easily a path to citizenship. We don't offer easily a refuge in America just because you happen to come to our border. And this effort to destroy the sense of border, if we are weak about it, and Mark Krikorian alluded to this too, if we say just to this, whatever the group now is, 100, 150 people, if we say to them, okay, you can stay until we can get an asylum court hearing, and just show up again when the hearing date. Here's your piece of paper. Wander free in America, and don't worry. We trust you to come back when you're on your court date. They never come to the court date. They are getting here with the notion of us getting inside America and then dispersing. And if we say that's okay for this small group, if we set that standard, or to put the other way, if we fail to set a firm standard that says we are at the border going to process every individual, we are going to hold you in a detention center until we can get to your case, and you're going to be, I'm not talking about keeping people in brutal conditions, but I am talking about keeping them confined in America, unable to move around, until we have a hearing and decide if they meet the standard that we have set in our asylum laws. And actually, Mark Krikorian had great ideas, too, about the how to change asylum laws, how to firm them up, how to make it so the asylum laws still meet the desire of a good and noble nation of Americans to offer asylum, refuge to truly oppressed and persecuted people, but at the same time to demand integrity of our borders and really just integrity of our sense of being an American citizen, what America means. So it was a great segment. Love to talk about that, but I'm going to turn to the next one. And these are just like three huge issues. It's always so fun to do a 3-hour show because they're usually about 25 issues. I have to get down to 3, but I picked 3 good ones for today. I want to turn to the situation in Iran. And, or really it's in America and for the world related to Iran. And you're likely aware that, this past week, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, gave a speech that it kind of caught world attention. It was explosive. And what he said is that it was a speech this past Monday in which he presented documents to the world that proved that the country of Iran had lied for years about its nuclear intentions. Iran always claimed that it wasn't trying to develop nuclear weapons. It was trying to develop the capacity to have nuclear energy as a source of energy for its people. So what Benjamin Netanyahu presented, that was essentially, I'll just read this 2 sentences. He claims that in 2017, the Iranians moved a comprehensive program to design, build, and test nuclear weapons to a secret location. So this program had been going on and on since the Iranian deal. The Iranian deal was struck in 2015. Iran had the records that were presented to the world by Benjamin Netanyahu show that Iran had actually been developing and working to develop nuclear weapons long before 2015, moving documents around, hiding them, lying about them. But the great thing, you just have to love the Israelis, that a few weeks ago, Mossad agents procured a 0.5 ton of that material, this material related to the Iranian nuclear program, and smuggled it out of the country. And the United States has now reportedly confirmed the authenticity of all these documents that Israel presented to the world. So, to summarize, Iran, we held negotiations in the Iranian deal in 2015 with the country of Iran, essentially in this kind of panicked effort presented by the Obama administration that we were going to have to do everything we could to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. And Iran came to the table because the sanctions had been so harsh on them that they had to come to the table. But what Benjamin Netanyahu has revealed in this speech to the world is that Iran lied the whole way through, lied about not what they were doing, hid documents. In fact, when we come back from the break, I'm going to review more of what was revealed by this speech by Benjamin Netanyahu, because this goes to the security of the world. Iran is the #1 terror exporting country in the world. When you think of names of terrorist entities, organizations, they're funded by Iran. And I'm setting the table for our conversation coming up at the bottom of the hour with Claire Lopez of the Center for Security Policy. She's a internationally renowned expert on Iran, a former CIA operative. I'll read you her resume right before she comes on, or pieces of it, but she's an expert on this. And the reason I want to be sure and talk about this is because this is revealing both about the danger America and the world have been in since we cut a deal with liars, and also it causes many serious questions to come up about what was Obama and John Kerry, what were they doing over there negotiating? Why we negotiated a deal that gave us no ability to actually inspect the sites where the weapons were being hidden. Come right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Graham Wood gives us a chilling picture of what Islamic jihadists are really like. His new book, The Way of the Strangers, Encounters with the Islamic State, is the result of years of interviewing ISIS members. It is amazing that he was allowed to interview them and that they didn't consider killing him or holding him for ransom. Those who he interviewed were called the strangers. When he asked them why they called themselves that, they said that that was a saying that the Prophet Muhammad gave them. Islam began as something strange and will return to being strange according to their theology. And it's that last point that I want to discuss. Rachel Martin of NPR's Morning Edition asked Graham Wood about his belief that many in the West misunderstand the religious roots of ISIS. Since he has interviewed many of them over the last few years, his answer is important for us to hear. He agrees that there is a strong urge to say that Islam has nothing to do with religion, that ISIS is a bunch of psychopaths, people with blades cutting off heads wantonly. Unfortunately, that's just not true. ISIS has looked into Islamic history with historical accuracy, with intellectual vigor. I hope that these new faces that will be placed in the Defense Department and the Department of Homeland Security begin to understand the religious roots of the Islamic jihadist. It has been fashionable to say that Muslim terrorism is a deviation from Islam and not representative of the religion. That may be so, but it does not mean that we should ignore the reason that these jihadists desire to kill innocents and bring down the Western world. Religion plays a much more important part in their actions than many in the current positions of leadership are willing to acknowledge. Graham Wood spent years trying to understand ISIS and the fighters for the Islamic State. Our leaders need to read his book and understand the motivation for these jihadists. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. Debbie Georgatos sitting in for Kirby Anderson. The call-in number, if you'd like to call, 1-800-351-1212. We talked in the first hour about the just amazing developments with respect to this group of people coming to America, seeking asylum, coming through Mexico, and where we stand as a country in asylum. I'm turning now to talk about the Iranian situation and the speech that Benjamin Netanyahu made this past Monday, in which he essentially exposed that Mossad agents, which I said, I think when I was reading the Mossad thing, you got to love the Israelis. I mean, they are just not going to put up with all the threats that they have to put up with. They fight back, they challenge, they're tough. So part of what Netanyahu exposed was that all this time when America and other countries have been negotiating with Iran to get to the deal, which, by the way, the deal is actually called the JCPOA. It's a Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. I believe it is. I don't have it in front of me. But anyway, the point is it was a deal struck by President Obama, John Kerry. There were 5 other countries involved negotiating with Iran. And they had this triumphant 2015 Iranian deal that was going to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. So I want to just point out some of the flaws in the deal, because I'm sure we talked about in this show at the time. I talked about it on my radio show, America Can We Talk, about how bad this deal was. But just to remind you a few things that happened during the negotiation of this and afterwards. One is that there was a lot of mockery by the Obama administration of people who would in any way challenge the deal, the wisdom of the deal. And there were many, many military experts, national security experts, who said, this is a terrible deal. Don't do this. The singular biggest problem with the deal was that the inspection procedures that were in the deal that said, we have to have inspections to make sure Iran really is not developing nuclear weapons. The inspection provisions did not permit inspections at the most important logical places where nuclear weapons would be developed. And so it was almost a meaningless inspection procedure to inspect the military installations where it was sensible that they might be engaging in this development of nuclear weapons, you had to submit a request, and there was a panel. It took 10 days, which, of course, everything gets moved around during that time. So, but there was a lot of mockery by the Obama administration. In fact, they bragged about creating a media echo chamber where all the media had been talked into agreeing with the characterization of the deal by the Obama people. But the bigger things were America released in January 2016 and alleged a reciprocal humanitarian gesture. America released serious, dangerous people, Iranian spies, including this guy who's named Ali Fayyad, top Hezbollah operative, released by us in exchange for this deal, this humanitarian gesture, a guy who was indicted in the U.S. in courts for planning to kill U.S. government employees. He was released as part of this humanitarian gesture deal after the Iranian deal was signed. There was a lot of reporting of slow-walking investigations against other Iranian spies in America. There was also this sending over to Iran of $1.7 billion worth of cash sent from America to Iran. Iran did release some American hostages, which it had no reason to be holding to start with. But okay, Iran released these hostages, including a Washington Post reporter named Jason, and I think it's Rizzayan. I'm not sure how to say his name. But at the time, these release of Americans released by the Iranians of Americans was made, and there was a $1.7 billion worth of cash sent over. And the Obama administration said, no, it's not ransom. We don't pay ransom for hostages. But later they actually said, well, the State Department spokesman John Kirby said, well, Iran released the hostages contingent on receiving money from America, which I think that adds up into a ransom. But anyway, this JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, really was on many false premises, including the ones I was mentioning, that they were we entered a deal in which we couldn't do the inspections at the places that matter the most. What appears clear now is the entire point of entering this deal on Iran's part was to continue developing their clandestine nuclear weapons program. That's what they were all about. That's what they wanted to do. And they continued doing that. Even the public inspection sites, which where inspection was permitted, Iran was allowed to continue developing advanced centrifuges, which it did too. It also had, there was a side deal involved in the Iranian deal, it's kind of interesting because the side deal, which was prohibited by American law, the Corker-Cardin bill that the Senate came up with when President Obama wouldn't let them put it through as an actual treaty, this Corker-Cardin bill said no side deals, and it turned out there was a side deal. And kind of interestingly, the person in Congress who exposed this side deal was Mike Pompeo, who is now our Secretary of State. So anyway, it appears that all of what was occurring inside Iran was just playing games and pulling the wool over the eyes of America and the other negotiators, continuing their process of developing nuclear weapons. And I think part of the other thing, I was learning some more about this, and all this matters to say that, we can't make the world perfectly safe. There are going to be bad actors. There have always been bad actors. There will be bad actors. Iran is the pinnacle of bad actor. Or I guess I shouldn't say it in a positive term. They're the pits of a bad actor. They are they are terror sponsoring. They fund Hezbollah. They fund all sorts of terror organizations around the world. So sending them billions of dollars just gave them more money to spend to give to terrorist organizations to kill other innocent people. It was a very, very bad deal. But at the time we were told this was just the best deal we could get, and we had to be grateful. And the other thing about this deal is only in place for 10 years. So in the year 2025, Iran was free to begin openly developing nuclear weapons, even though they always said they weren't. But I think this speech by Netanyahu, this exposure of Iran, it really gives the world, America and the world, a chance for a reset, a chance to say, now that we know you lied and lied repeatedly, and that you were developing nuclear weapons, I mean, the material that Benjamin Netanyahu exposed was overwhelming. It wasn't just, a memo from one official to the next inside the Iranian government. It was a ton of information confirming what many national security experts have been saying, which is, of course, Iran is developing nuclear weapons. So we're at a place now, and this is why I can't wait to have our guest on the next segment, Claire Lopez. She's with Center for Security Policy, and she's going to talk about, and I'm going to ask her, what do we do now? Now we know that they had weapons all along, that they hid materials, they moved them to avoid the inspectors. And what does the world do? Because, the deal was actually not just between America and Iran, but it had the 4 other countries that are members of the United Nations Security Council, plus Germany, which isn't a member, but they were of the Security Council, but they were part of the deal. So you have those countries, they've signed on. You have very friendly messages about Iran from some of those powers in Western Europe, some of those Security Council members, because they have investments in Iran. They have financial ties to Iran. And their question of, can't we somehow keep this deal in place? What do we do as America? We're trying to be the one to keep the world as safe as we can. We're trying to protect the interests of innocent people throughout the Middle East, protect persecuted Christians, protect, innocent people of all backgrounds in the Middle East. And you have this, terror exporting, rogue nation that is just, and has, and Iran only came to the table to negotiate because of sanctions the world through the UN had placed on them over and over. They got to the point they had to fight back against the sanctions. So this is just it's a very interesting place we find ourselves. And I do think also there's this, I mentioned it being the National Day of Prayer today, and I'm sure you, our listeners, and many people you pray for world peace. You pray for you pray for God's hand in the world affairs. You pray for people being lifted out of darkness and hatred and violence. You pray for protection. I do think it's a really great time in America for us all to be thinking about this. The Iranian deal. I mean, the particular decision where we stand right now, to be clear, is President Trump has until May 12th to say whether or not America is going to withdraw from the Iranian deal because of the failure of the Iranians to comply. So withdraw from the deal is one choice you could make. But if you withdraw, then you don't have Iran as part of a deal. Iran says, okay, great, we're not tied up anymore. We're going for it. We're going to develop nuclear weapons. So what is the right tact for a leader like President Trump, right tact for America to protect the future and yet not be treated as fools as we have been so far by the country of Iran? As we come back, Claire Lopez will be on. You'll love it.
Point of View turned life right side up for Emily's children. Emily listens in Illinois. She and her husband blissfully sent their children off each day to what she called our small, quaint public school until Point of View led them to watch the documentary Indoctrination. She said, "We came to realize the need for us to educate our children at home. We want their education to be built on the solid foundation of Scripture." Emily said that would not have happened were it not for Point of View's bold consistency of shining light on public education. Your support for Point of View changes the future for children like Emily's. It leads people to start schools and ministries and businesses that change lives. How has the Truth Team impacted you? Please invest to bring truth to other families like Emily's. Support Truth today. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back. Debbie Georgatos filling in on Point of View for Kirby Anderson. Love being here. We have a guest joining us this hour. We have Claire Lopez online. Excuse me, I didn't say that clearly. Claire Lopez. She's Vice President for Research and Analysis at the Center for Security Policy. I've had her join me on my show, also, America Can We Talk? And she's always just a fount of knowledge. I find myself taking copious notes as she's speaking. But in addition to being with Center for Security Policy, she's a senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research, a member of the Board of Advisors for the Canadian Mackenzie Institute, former vice president of the Intelligence Summit. I mean, she's just a nationally renowned expert on national security, and in particular, very, very knowledgeable about Iran. So I was so excited and glad we could line up to have her join us today on Point of View. So, hi, Claire.
Hey, Debbie. Hi. It's good to be with you.
So glad you're on, and I want to jump right in. I talked the last segment about the big speech that Benjamin Netanyahu made last week, earlier this week, talking about what Mossad had managed to find out about Iran and their ongoing nuclear program. So I talked some about it, but can you just, in a summary way, tell what did Netanyahu expose about what Iran's been doing?
Sure. So what we know now is that around January of 2016, the Israelis were advised, probably by Iranian networks on the inside of Iran, about the location of this warehouse in Tehran where the regime was storing its nuclear weapons archives. They waited for about a full year until January 2017 when I think probably in collaboration, the Mossad, Israeli intelligence, and the Iranian opposition, probably the National Council for the Resistance of Iran, or Mujahideen Khalq teams, raided this warehouse, hauled out something on the order of 100,000 files contained in 55,000 actual pages of material, and another 55,000 or so files on 183 CDs, discs. And they managed to get this out of Iran. Again, this is January 2017, a year and a half ago. They spent, I guess, the intervening time waiting for Donald Trump to be inaugurated and getting his team in place, translating all this material, and I imagine probably laying out the course of action that now will follow and unfold after this past Monday's announcement by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which was broadcast on Monday, the, what was that, the 30th of April.
April 30th, yeah.
Yeah, 30th of April. And what he revealed is this, that the Iranians have had a clandestine nuclear weapons program that has nothing to do with the nuclear deal the P5+1 IAEA and Iran all agreed to in July of 2015. That's only about the overt program. This is about the real Iranian nuclear weapons program, the clandestine one. The Iranian regime had set as an objective, a goal, we don't know how long ago, but some years ago, to build 5 nuclear warheads of 10 kilotons each. So to design and to build nuclear weapons, nuclear warheads, to develop the nuclear cores, that is the pits, the milled enriched uranium pits of a nuclear warhead, to build the nuclear implosion systems. These are the explosives that set off a nuclear implosion sequence from the outside of the two hemispheres. They prepared for nuclear tests on Iranian territory at multiple sites around the country. And they were working on integrating nuclear warheads to fit on top of the nose cones of their ballistic missiles, which are intercontinental, by the way.
Everything you just described, and as I said, I always take notes when you're talking, but is what we learn from this, and just in small part, does this mean that Iran was much further along in developing their nuclear weapon capacity than we before realized? I mean, did we suspect they kind of had this stuff, or is this a mind-blowing assessment of how far along they were?
Well, unfortunately, U.S. intelligence community is so badly broken, so incompetent, and penetrated, I would say, by proponents, supporters of the Tehran regime. We call it the Iran lobby, that they probably did not know about this. But the Israelis, on the other hand, perhaps being so much geographically closer, it sort of focuses the attention to Iran, have, I believe, probably been working with the Iranian opposition, as I said before, the NCRI, the Mujahideen Khalq, the MEK, for quite a number of years. And so the Israelis are on top of this. They know about the Iranian clandestine nuclear weapons program. In the United States, unfortunately, it's been denied that there even is such a thing, and hence the JCPOA, which is pure kabuki dance theater, dealing only with the overt program, and not only just ignoring that there even is a clandestine nuclear weapons program that has never skipped a beat, has continued incessantly since the Ayatollah Khomeini began it, ordered his IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, to get the bomb, essentially, back in 1988. That's how long they've been at it, with the help of China, North Korea, Pakistan, Russia, and a whole network of suppliers and providers the world over. The Israelis know this. For the United States, because we're so behind the ball in terms of intelligence capability, perhaps it came as news. I don't know.
So now that we have this information, I'm so grateful that you're joining us today, and I want to have us I'm learning so much just listening to you. Now that we know this information, I mean, we're sitting where we are. President Trump has said he has to decide by May 12th whether to withdraw from the JCPOA. And again, I was telling our listeners, that's the name of the Iranian deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and, JCPOA. Trump has said May 12th he's going to decide whether to withdraw. Now that we know what they had, we know that they lied, we know they're moving things around, are we smart to pull out of it? Or are we, what's the smart thing to, I mean, it's obviously meaningless, but do we free them up to more aggressively and openly pursue nuclear weapons if we pull out of it?
The Iranians are going to do what the Iranians are going to do anyway. They lie, cheat, and have lied and cheated since 1988. Let's remember, Iran, like the United States, is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. To even pursue a clandestine nuclear weapons program without revealing all of your sites, all of your programs to the IAEA is a violation of the NPT to begin with, never mind the JCPOA, which doesn't come along until 2015. So it doesn't matter if we have a JCPOA or not. It's like I said before, it's kabuki dance. It's pure theater. It may as well not exist because it doesn't constrain the Iranians in any way, shape, or form. They were not constrained in production of enriched uranium, in construction of advanced and more modern, faster centrifuges. They were not constrained in the development of underground sites. They were not constrained in development of their ballistic missile program, which isn't even part of the JCPOA. They were not constrained in terms of what I call a joint venture relationship with North Korea on developing all of the above. The JCPOA constrained none of that. So what's the point of having it? The only reason or the only thing I think that the JCPOA actually did was to blind and fool the willingly gullible in the West that wanted to believe that somehow the JCPOA had some functionality and connection to reality. It didn't. It doesn't. So, yes, on May 12, we do expect that President Trump will announce the U.S. is pulling out of the JCPOA. You might have heard recently the Iranian foreign minister, Javad Zarif, who negotiated this abomination with then Secretary of State John Kerry, announced just a day or two ago that, Iran's going to pull out of it too. Well, you know, go
You're not
ahead,
complying anyway, so what?
Yeah, knock yourself out, guys. You haven't been abiding by it anyway, and I can list a whole bunch of other explicit breaches of the JCPOA.
I want to jump in and have you do that. We're going to zip off to
that.
We have Claire Lopez online with Center for Security Policy. We're talking about the Iranian deal and the whole great news that came out, that we learned the truth about Iran that came out from the speech from President Netanyahu. Prime Minister Netanyahu, come back after the break.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Accabono Brake Corporation hired Clintoria Burnett in 2014 at one of its South Carolina automotive brake manufacturing locations as a temporary worker. Burnett is an adherent to the Apostolic Faith Church of God in True Holiness. Her faith requires that she cannot wear pants, and even since she was a small child, she has worn only skirts and dresses. When Burnett received the offer for the job of washer inspector, she was wearing an ankle-length skirt. When she was told that she would have to wear pants to perform her job, the company withdrew their offer of employment. According to the complaint filed by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the company failed to engage in any form of interactive process regarding a religious accommodation for Burnett, and failed to consider any potential accommodation of Burnett's religious beliefs. Once an employer knows of an employee's religion, it is required by law to at least make an effort to accommodate or demonstrate why such an accommodation would work an undue hardship upon the business. Companies often have difficulty staffing positions, and safety regulations can make that task even more difficult. Yet it is vital that companies maintain our national commitment to religious liberty and human dignity by at least trying to find a way to accommodate an employee's religious liberty at the job site. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back. I hope you've been listening. We are coming right back to our guest we have online tonight, Claire Lopez, who was Center for Security Policy, fabulous expert on Iran and, generally speaking, America's national security. So we've been talking about the fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu revealed to the world in a speech this past Monday that Iran has lied over and over and over with respect to its development of the nuclear weapons program, their development of nuclear weapons program, and that therefore the Iranian deal, to the extent you thought it had any value, does not, because we've just been duped. So what is the course to take, though, here, Claire? What does America do with a country like Iran? We starved them with sanctions, essentially, which got them to the table in 2015. but they just can't be trusted. So what is it we do?
Well, I would throw a caution in about sanctions, which is nothing wrong with sanctions, but typically what that does in a totalitarian regime like either North Korea or Iran is simply enrich the elites. Because why? When goods and services are restricted, those who control the gateway, the import of desired goods and services now made more scarce or more expensive, those are the ones who become enriched. And so the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, his senior IRGC, General Jafari, or Quds Force, Qasem Soleimani, they sock away millions in Swiss bank accounts and elsewhere when sanctions are imposed. And I might add, people don't realize this perhaps, but during the time with regard to Iran, when the sanctions bit down the hardest, let's say 2011, 12, 13, that time period, while the JCPOA was being discussed, is when Iran's nuclear weapons program accelerated the fastest.
Wow.
They produced more enriched uranium, more centrifuges, more advanced centrifuges, et cetera, during that time than before. So maybe it's human nature. You think that you're going to be cracked down on. You quick speed things up to get more done as fast as you can.
Yep.
But that's what sanctions do.
Well, I'm glad.
Your question still stands, though, of course, which is what do we do? Yeah, and so I think the most important thing is to say, look, Iran, we don't trust you, we don't believe you, we're never getting into any other agreement with this regime ever again because you lie. And I think then the next thing to do is to express United States official administration, government support for the people of Iran who have been in the streets. This isn't much covered by American or mainstream media, but the Iranian people have been in the streets all over the country of Iran since at least around Christmas time, that is last December 2017. They are protesting not just economic hardship, and that is part of it, and unions are leading some of these strikes and going on strike, but they're also protesting the regime itself. They're protesting the tyrannical nature of an oppressive jihad regime that dictates to them every detail of their private lives, from their haircuts to what kind of T-shirts they're allowed to wear. And then, of course, to the women, the brave Iranian women we're seeing in the street pulling off their hijabs, those scarves, headscarves, that they're supposedly obligated to wear by Iranian law, and getting arrested, tortured, and raped for it. So we need to express our support for the people of Iran and their quest for liberty, for freedom. It doesn't mean bombs away, and it doesn't mean 101st Airborne tomorrow. But what it does mean is providing support to the Iranian people as they request it, what they would like us to do. Things that come to mind would be communications assistance, getting around the jamming of the Iranian intelligence services when they try to shut down social media like Instagram or Telegram. Perhaps a dedicated bandwidth on a U.S. government satellite that can't be jammed to help them with broadcasting, with communicating. Perhaps helping with such things as strike funds. When unions go on strike, and this is what needs to happen, the entire country needs to be shut down, as in the time before the Shah fell, 78, 79. When unions and workers go on strike, they need something to sustain them and their families while they're on strike. That's the kind of help that I think we could possibly provide, never mind the importance, the supreme importance of the bully pulpit of the White House, of the United States government. Now we have, Mike Pompeo at Secretary of State, John Bolton, advisor, National Security Council. Statements coming from these people mean the world to people like Iranians struggling for their liberty.
I love every word you just said, Claire Lopez. I love the idea of supporting the protesters, and I talk about that on my show, too, and I have someone coming on Sunday, actually, on my show, to talk again about the Iranian citizens. They are in the streets protesting. Our media barely covers it, but they don't want to live under this regime either. All those are just great, great ideas. I also want to mention one thing I think is in the JCPOA, which is this Article 10 of Annex 3, but it basically obligates America to protect Iran's program of, allegedly developing nuclear, using nukes for nuclear power, but we help protect Iran's program against sabotage, presumably from Israel. We need to free ourselves from that so that we can back Israel if Israel's going to take some action against their neighbor.
Very good point. And that is a section of the JCPOA that doesn't get much attention. So thank you for bringing that up. But yes, that particular detail provision of the JCPOA obligates the parties, that would be us and the other P5 of the UN Security Council, Brits, French, Chinese, Russians, and the +1 part Germans, to helping the Iranians to defend their own sites. And then another provision that I might point out connected to this is the one that provides a request channel. I don't know what else to call it, a request channel for investigations or for inspections. But the Iranians have absolutely no obligation. There is no compelling or no obligatory mechanism in the JCPOA to compel them to open up a site anywhere, anytime. I mean, now think of other regimes that gave up nuclear weapons programs. South Africa, for example, Libya under Muammar Gaddafi, for example. They allowed the IAEA to come in and crawl all over the country, anywhere, anytime inspections to verify that they did indeed give up their nuclear weapons programs. There's no such mechanism to compel that in the JCPOA for Iran. So when they say that, their military sites, Parchin, for example, are off limits to inspections, the request procedure can go round and round till the cows come home, but it won't make any difference. They're not getting in. And that alone practically negates or, obviates the JCPOA's validity if they can hide whatever. I mean, where would you put your nukes? If they can hide wherever they want and say, no, you're not coming in here.
That's just a very good point. Sadly, we're out of time. These segments go by so quickly. You made reference to the IAEA, which was supposed to be the investigating authority, and we really are out of time. But I just want to say, when we come back from the break, I want to talk about the IAEA, what a complete failure and in fact, beyond incompetence, just irresponsibility in conducting their work. Claire Lopez, thank you so very much. Love talking with you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, folks, we're going to come back and talk about the entity you're supposed to be inspecting and how much they dropped the ball, too. Come right back.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And hello, welcome back. Debbie Georgatos. Just love filling in for Kirby Anderson every chance I get on Point of View. And again, our caller line is 800-351-1212. We've covered some pretty heavy topics that I was thinking about during the break. But, you know, they're big issues in America. They're big issues for responsible Americans who support our country, who pray for our country, who want our country to remain in its position of strength and stability, and to spread strength and stability around the world to the extent we can. So we talked about, first of all, the National Day of Prayer, of course, which is today and should be every day, and also the caravan of people coming through Mexico from South America. Great conversation with Mark Krikorian of the Center for Immigration Studies. Just talked about Iran and the just explosive revelations that were information that was shared with the world by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu this past Monday, essentially pointing out that Mossad had discovered that Iran, contrary to its many assertions in public, had indeed been attempting to develop nuclear weapons. And I just thought Claire Lopez was stellar in laying out. You can imagine the reaction of some people where you're just horrified by the conduct of Iran and lying to the world, and they are the number one terror exporting country in the world, and they've been developing nuclear weapons, and they have ICBMs, and they're developing them, which is not prohibited by the Iranian deal. But anyway, she just did a great job, and really in particular supporting America's friend Israel. Seems all by itself for us to be able to be loyal to and protect Israel. We have to withdraw from the Iranian deal, the JCPOA, just because we need not to be bound by some provision that says we'll help Iran in case Israel moves in to try to take away the nuclear capacity that Iran is trying to develop. So it's just great. The last little tidbit on that story before I turn to the other big story, the third big story of our 3 hours today, which is what's happening in North Korea, another simply kind of just astonishing development in the world. But the Iranian deal included provisions permitting very limited and ineffective provisions, but provisions that deal with inspections of the apparent sites within Iran where they may be developing nuclear weapons. The inspections provisions were inadequate for the reasons I said last hour and what Claire said. But the other little piece of it that's very interesting is the entity that was in the terms of the Iranian deal, supposed to be doing these inspections, is the IAEA, and that is an entity that's an international organization. It's been in place since 1957. It's an independent organization. It's not part of the UN, but the IAEA had the job of doing these inspections. And the reason is the International Atomic Energy Agency. And the entire focus of this agency is to try to promote peaceful use of nuclear energy. And so it's, the world, including America, wants to use the nuclear power to develop energy, which I'm in favor of. It's fabulous. We should do more of it in America. But you always obviously have to be careful that countries aren't using it to develop nuclear weapons. So the IAEA, to say they dropped the ball in Iran, does not begin to describe. I mean, they were, prohibited from certain sites, but they did. In fact, they have been supportive of this organization, and they essentially uncovered nothing. In fact, they certified before it started that they were unaware that there were efforts on behalf of Iran to engage in the development of nuclear weapons. And, it's an interesting thing. Claire Lopez was pointing out that America's, the highest echelon of America's national security, has been penetrated by sympathizers with Iran, penetrated by people whose thinking is more along the lines to protect Iran than to protect America. And so our national security forces, which should be second to none in the world, actually, as far as we know, we're not aware of the information that Israel obtained by being more aggressive and trying to figure out what Iran was doing. So, there's just a need in America. We talk about the National Day of Prayer and to prayer for America, to pray for our elected officials and our appointed officials and people in power to be discerning, to use wisdom, to use judgment, to not be blinded, to not be confused. Because the idea that we did not know what Iran was doing and Israel did is not great. I mean, I'm glad that Israel did, but there is that need to claim for America our place in the world as a country committed to liberty and a country based on biblical principles. Our leaders should be the most discerning, the most astute, the most aware. And so we need to be praying for our country along those lines. And on the subject of the IAEA, just like our own national security forces in America can be penetrated by biases, prejudices, weaknesses, temptations of all kinds, IAEA apparently did not have the capacity, the tenacity, whatever it took to really understand what Iran was doing. And as a short little background on them, back in 1991, the IAEA had given Saddam Hussein's Iraq 11 clean bills of health. 11 times they certified Baghdad was not working on a covert nuclear program. Yet documents and Saddam Hussein's own son-in-law revealed that, in fact, Saddam Hussein had fooled the IAEA inspectors. And as a result, because of that, they had just, Saddam Hussein had utterly duped the IAEA, and that came out later. And the IAEA, in response, decided to put together they added something called the Additional Protocol. And so it's essentially trying to toughen it up. But you talk about the need for prayer just for the forces of good in the world to have strength and discernment and clarity. Because if you have pointless inspections, as we apparently had in Iran, and they're pointless. And I just think this is a time to be alert as Christians, as lovers of liberty, lovers of America, supporters of a biblically based society that sustains itself through strength. We need to be really strong and consistent and firm in our prayer about what's happening around the world and the danger spots in the world, and whether it's being duped by people in California and left-wing radicals who are funding this invasion at the southern border, invasion disguised as a hapless group of low-income people from poor countries coming to here desperately seeking asylum, when, as a matter of fact, what they're doing is trying to attack the idea that America should have borders. That's what this thing was, the southern border, or whether what we're watching right now with Iran and the failure of our own country, our president and the negotiators then to recognize that they were being duped by the country of Iran. We have our strength and goodness and power from God, and we need to pray about that and insist on its presence in our everyday lives. So, okay, so we're in the last hour of the show. It always 3 hours race by. It's amazing to say. You might think talking for 3 hours is hard. It's just fun and not hard at all. But this last hour, we are going to turn to talking about North Korea. We come back from the break. I'm going to set the table for you about North Korea, and then we're going to have a fabulous guest join us, Peter Brooks from Heritage Foundation. So don't go away.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Graham Wood gives us a chilling picture of what Islamic jihadists are really like. His new book, The Way of the Strangers, Encounters with the Islamic State, is the result of years of interviewing ISIS members. It is amazing that he was allowed to interview them and that they didn't consider killing him or holding him for ransom. Those who he interviewed were called the strangers. When he asked them why they called themselves that, they said that that was a saying that the Prophet Muhammad gave them. Islam began as something strange and will return to being strange according to their theology. And it's that last point that I want to discuss. Rachel Martin of NPR's Morning Edition asked Graham Wood about his belief that many in the West misunderstand the religious roots of ISIS. Since he has interviewed many of them over the last few years, his answer is important for us to hear. He agrees that there is a strong urge to say that Islam has nothing to do with religion, that ISIS is a bunch of psychopaths, people with blades cutting off heads wantonly. Unfortunately, that's just not true. ISIS has looked into Islamic history with historical accuracy, with intellectual vigor. I hope that these new faces that will be placed in the Defense Department and the Department of Homeland Security begin to understand the religious roots of the Islamic jihadist. It has been fashionable to say that Muslim terrorism is a deviation from Islam and not representative of the religion. That may be so, but it does not mean that we should ignore the reason that these jihadists desire to kill innocents and bring down the Western world. Religion plays a much more important part in their actions than many in the current positions of leadership are willing to acknowledge. Graham Wood spent years trying to understand ISIS and the fighters for the Islamic State. Our leaders need to read his book and understand the motivation for these jihadists. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to A Point of View. I'm Debbie Georgatos. I'm going to make one more little plug for my radio show before I launch into this story about North Korea. I really enjoy doing whenever I'm asked to substitute host for Kirby Anderson or serving the round table in Point of View. My own radio show is called America Can We Talk? And if you're watching this show on Facebook, you can also watch my show on Facebook, my radio show. It's a weekly show, Sunday evening, 6 to 8 p.m. Central Time. It's on air on radio in Dallas and several other big cities. But if wherever you are, you can watch it on Sunday evening. We have great guests also. We put the show out on Facebook Live. We have wonderful commentary ongoing on the show. We have people commenting on Facebook and people emailing. So it's really always about dedicated to preserving, as I always say, the unique, extraordinary, exceptional idea that is America. And so I'd love to have you listen to that too, and love to have you commenting on that show. So, but back to Point of View, our last hour topic today is about North Korea. And I just, to set the table before we have Peter Brooks join us, I'll tell you more about him right before he comes on. But to set the table in this story, some of you have probably seen the satellite image of over the peninsula of North Korea, and the northern part of northern half, North Korea, is at night black, except for a tiny, pinprick of light in their capital. South Korea, and that is because they are communist, and the system that communists embrace is socialism. So when people say, I don't like communism, but socialism is okay. No, it's not. Socialism is a system that communists inflict on their people who have no way out. South Korea, on the other hand, is a free country, has democracy, it has elected government, and it has, it has free markets. It's freedom based. And so, anyway, so that's a little bit of an aside. But as you probably saw, since President Trump was elected and took office in January 2017, he has been far more vocal and critical and outspoken, speaking out against the leader of North Korea. And just a little background on him, the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. By the way, before I left, I was quick trying to check, what is his title? Was it President, Prime Minister? Okay, this is just typical. Okay, North Korea has no freedom, no elections, no freedom, no nothing. I mean, you live under the brutal control of the North Korean totalitarian dictator. Kim Jong-un, the current dictator, actually has the title Supreme Leader. I mean, just spare me, but okay. So Kim Jong-un is the Supreme Leader of North Korea. He's had that power since 2011. He's the third in his family, third generation. So his grandfather was dictator, his dad was, now he was. 2011, he was 27 years old when he became dictator of North Korea. It is a brutal, brutal regime. He is this way. His dad was this way. Just things like, I'll just give quick examples. You get the depth of evil that North Korea represents. They, of course, have the territorial imperative. As I say, you can't leave. They'll kill you if you try to leave. It is utter inflation of communism. It is. I mean, they have had millions of people starving to death because they have no prosperity, no food, no economy. It is. They had, just as one little example, I think it was his dad that did this. He had the chief, whatever the guy's title was, who worked at their national aquarium. The North Koreans actually have an aquarium, which was shocking. But they had a guy who was in charge of the animals at the aquarium who was executed because some giant turtle died. He has had people in his regime executed. I mean, relatives of his. I mean, the guy is a brutal, irrational, probably not even sane dictator. And in previous administrations in this country, we have, and he's also, developing weapons, threatening to develop nuclear weapons, been firing off weapons off the North Korean peninsula, making everybody nervous because he's not rational and he's violent and so he's just he is the poster child for a not just rogue but a dangerous totalitarian rogue regime. He's basically in the world pretty much only connected to China, and China is viewed to be kind of the controller of North Korea. So this North Korean leader has been just, sending off weapons, alarming people. And before President Trump came along, American presidents kind of a little bit deferential, a little bit. They say, well, we got to rein him in, we got to be careful, but they haven't been willing to speak harshly about him and to him. And during the time since President Trump has been serving as U.S. president, he has spoken more harshly and in a much more aggressive manner about the North Korean leader. And in fact, he was mocking. He tweets things that are mocking. He's just unwilling to treat him with deference and respect. And then most recently, or early since his presidency, there were the Olympics were held in South Korea, and actually, amazingly, the North Koreans sent participants. They sent Olympic athletes to participate, and that was kind of a shocking and surprising thing. And so so I'm leading all up to say that within the last few weeks, it has seemed that something finally got to this North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, and he is now willing to talk about denuclearization, getting rid of nuclear weapons. And this would be, of course, massively helpful to the world, make the world a safer place. He's been a leader, belligerent with his military. He's seeming like he's softening. He actually met with the South Korean leader. The president of South Korea is Moon Jae-in. I may be mispronouncing that. I'll find out in a moment from Peter Brooks. But he's met with him, and he has, in these meetings, expressed that he will be willing to denuclearize, to get rid of nuclear weapons in North Korea. He also, the two leaders, so the North Korean and South Korean countries have been separated by this demilitarized zone since the Korean War. And the leaders, when they met, talked about, they agreed that they are going to bring about signing an agreement to end the 60-year division, 60-year hostility between the two countries. And so these are now two physically separate countries, North Korea, South Korea, but they're talking about bringing, actually ending their division. And so there are a lot of ways to go in this, but what is, first of all, is, what in the world has possessed him? His people, literally the people, like Claire Lopez said a moment ago, when you impose sanctions tend to starve the poorest people, the ones who barely have food to start with. So that's part of the problem is, how are sanctions going to help? But in North Korea, they have millions starving. They have brutal detention camps, brutal concentration camps. They had, of course, the American student who went to North Korea and committed the most minor of infractions and was literally murdered by the North Korean, the death camps, the concentration camps there where they tortured him. This is that young man, Otto Warmbier, and was, sent home after just being tortured in hideous manner, and was sent home to America in a coma and died. He just had been tortured to death. This is a brutal regime. So what has happened in the last weeks is that the North Korean leader has agreed to meet with South Korea. He did meet with him. They're talking about ending hostilities. I don't know where it stands at this moment, but there was a promise by the North Koreans that they were going to release American prisoners, political prisoners, held in these impossibly brutal concentration camps. That's probably not the word they use, concentration camps. That's my word. But these are not like sitting in jail and getting your 3 square meals a day and, an hour outside in the sun. These are ongoing torture places where you're sent if you ever speak ill of the government, if you ever speak ill of communism, if you ever make a joke or you fail to salute or smile or clap when the president thinks you should. So this has been just a truly an astonishing development in watching what's happening in North Korea. And the question is, I can't wait to ask Peter Brook is, because many people are saying it like, do we really believe this guy? And what should we do about that? And, America has a significant military presence in South Korea. And the South Korean president I saw did announce Moon Jae-in, the South Korean leader, said, well, don't be thinking that the American troops need to leave. There's that whole aspect. The American troops are there to keep the North Koreans out of South Korea. And I think, and this South Korean leader is saying, no, you need to stay. But the other interesting aspect of all this is, so they're going to hopefully have a merger, North and South, or that would be the goal of some people, North and South Korea. But, do they have a merger under the principles of freedom and the South Korean way, the freedom way? Or is this, with the North Korean leader, is he getting friendly because he's thinking that he's pretty soon going to be dictator of the entire Korean country, which would have been his goal in past times. So this is just a most interesting time. I can't wait to talk to Peter Brooks about it. And I do know the South Korean leader is more left-leaning, more left-leaning than numerous predecessors. Makes people a little nervous. He's a little too friendly about the idea of socialism. And so all of those are in play as we watch it in America, what's going to happen in this North-South Korea thing. So come back from the break. We'll be talking with Peter Brooks of the Heritage Foundation, and we'll ask him all about Korea. Be right back.
Imagine you work where people do not share your faith, and they certainly don't agree with a Christian view of life and culture. You are surrounded by hostility every single day. How important would it be to have solid information to back you up? Jim in South Carolina listens to Point of View in the afternoons. He writes, I teach in a public secular university and enjoy actually being a voice for the biblical Christian worldview in a liberal setting. Thank you for your ministry. Thank you for being bold and proclaiming truth. And Jim finishes, I pray for you daily. Jim works in hostile territory, and he prays for Point of View because Point of View is a source of truth. Please help us continue being here for Jim and everyone else. We need you to visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151 and join the Truth Team. Enable us to be here each day by giving each month. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And hello, welcome back. Debbie Georgatos, filling in for Kirby Anderson. Love doing Point of View every chance I get. And we do have on the line, I believe, our third guest for today's show. I believe we have on line Peter Brooks. Hello, sir.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for joining me. You know, I want to tell our guests, I didn't get to do this before the break, so quick tell. Peter Brooks is a senior fellow for national security affairs at the Heritage Foundation. And on my own radio show, America Can We Talk, as well as on Point of View, I love having Heritage Foundation guests because They're just always really knowledgeable and very, very helpful. But by way of quick background, Peter Brooks served in the administration of President George W. Bush, a fine Texan, as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Affairs. He was responsible for U.S. defense policy for 38 countries. He just has a world of experience. He was a professional staff at the House International Relations Committee. Plus, he served in the Navy and is a retired naval intelligence officer. And I notice he has a doctorate from Georgetown University. That's my law school, so yay for that, too. Okay, but Mr. Brooks, the reason I have you on the phone is I want to talk about what we're watching happening with North Korea. And we have Kim Jong-un, I've used many adjectives about him, but he is brutal, he is bizarre, he's unpredictable, he's dangerous, and he appears to be coming around, and he's volunteering to denuclearize, apparently, meeting with South Korea. So is he faking us out, or are we really seeing a change in him?
Well, we don't really know. We're obviously looking at what is happening. Much of it seems positive. There's reasons to be cautiously optimistic, but deeply skeptical based on the history with North Korea. Just a few months ago, he was talking about turning the United States and Seoul, South Korea, into seas of fire, threatening us with his nuclear weapons and his ballistic missiles. And now we've seen this drastic change on paper and in rhetoric, but in a little bit in deeds, in fairness. But there's a long way to go. There's a lot of heavy lifting to do. He had a good summit with the South Korean leader. It was historic in many ways. The first time a North Korean leader had actually traveled to South Korea. I mean, he was just over the line, basically the DMZ, the 38th parallel, but still very symbolic, very historic, has said a lot of positive things, and has not asked for much in return, which is interesting to me. So I think, they're working on a summit between Chairman Kim and President Trump for some time, maybe this month, maybe next month, depending on negotiations about where, when, things along that line, issues to be discussed, if there will be any deliverables, which is Washington speak for some sort of agreement or something that actually happens other than on paper. It could be the start of just a series of negotiations, a series of meetings. So we're all kind of holding our breath. But for many of us who have worked on North Korea, I've actually been to North Korea when I was a congressional staffer. There's a lot of history that we have to overcome, and a lot of distrust that we have to overcome to just grasp this as something as just positive.
Wow. First of all, I didn't know you'd been to North Korea, and that there is a small little universe of Americans who've done that. And I just, obviously the world watched the whole Otto Warmbier thing and that young man being obviously tortured badly in these concentration camps. And I call them concentration camps. I guess they're prison camps and sent home and obviously died from the scope of his injury. So there's a lot of bad blood between America and North Korea. But I don't even want to say I'm cautiously optimistic because I keep waiting to wake up and realize that he didn't mean it. But, I do wonder, a leader like that, he's got a country that is, they've had millions lost in starvation over decades, and he's kind of isolated and almost and hated by most of the world. And you think, well, maybe he just doesn't want that anymore. I mean, I'm getting back to what in the world is motivating this. Do you have any other ideas?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we don't really know. And in fact, I've heard from folks who have met with North Korean officials at events and things along this line, and there seem to be indicating that it's being held very closely at the top. So some of his officials don't even know what he's up to. The only person who really knows is Kim Jong-un and maybe some of his very closest staff. I think it's fair to, and you're right. I mean, this is a brutal dictatorship, and he's brutalized his people. And you mentioned the tragic death of Otto Warmbier. But he's talking about returning some American detainees that he's held for a few years soon. I mean, this is news. We're all hoping that they will be quickly reunited with their families and released from North Korea. And they've been held on what seems to me the spurious charges by the North Korean regime. So
we're going to have to see. I mean, what sort of epiphany did he have? I would say there's a lot of things that's going on here. One is the economic pressure put on by the Trump administration had an effect. North Korea has lived with privation for a long time. They've been under sanctions by us since 1950, and higher or lower levels. Others have piled on. President Trump got President Xi of China to put more pressure on North Korea. China is North Korea's biggest benefactor in terms of food and aid, fuel aid. I think that the South Koreans had a fantastic Olympics with North Korea. I think they handled it masterfully. I think they deserve some credit for that. They had a very good summit recently. I think it's multi-causal. I think it's certainly multi-causal. But the questions come down to things like, what does North Korea really mean by denuclearization? I mean, to us, it means like you're going to get rid of all your nukes.
Yes.
What do they want? But what does it mean to them? Are they talking about doing that? We had an agreement with them under the Clinton administration that we were very skeptical of when I was a congressional staffer, and when I went to the Pentagon, we found out they were actually cheating on it. Do they want to keep a minimum credible deterrent, which is a geeky foreign policy Washington term for keeping a handful of nukes so that they feel safe? Are they willing to sign a peace treaty, and what does that mean? Are they willing to, open up in terms of the possibility of reunification of the Korean people? I've always felt that the regime, as brutal as it was, that its job number one was regime survival. The Kim family, and it's Kim Incorporated, basically, over there in Korea. But so I think there's a lot of things that's motivating it, but I don't know if anybody really knows besides Kim Jong-un, and that's why everybody is waiting with bated breath to see what the next thing is.
I had someone on my own show about a month or so ago was talking about the people in South Korea and how some of the older citizens in South Korea, they feel still an ethnic connection to North Korea. Like they're a little bit more interested in the idea of maybe we somehow merge again and be a country because they feel connected. And younger voters or people in South Korea think, I don't like how North Korea sounds. It sounds dangerous, repressive. I can't get access to, social media, all the kind of freedoms they take for granted there. But I wonder, within South Korea, I would think there's some interest in ultimately trying to reunite this as a country, the whole peninsula as a country. But you sure hope it's reunited under free ideas, capitalist ideas, South Korea ideas versus a North Korea ideas. And I don't know if that's too far-fetched to think ahead, but do you think that's in the works?
Well, that's a heavy lift. I agree that there is a desire for one Korea. I think that to a certain extent on both sides of the peninsula, but North Korea has the idea of unifying the peninsula under its communist rule. I mean, that was the reason for the Korean War.
Yep.
I don't think they've necessarily given that up. Now, it's possible they have, and we'll see. A peace treaty, you remember, the North and South are technically still at war. Actually, North Korea and China are technically still at war at the U.S. with the United Nations, which the U.S. led effort in the Korean War. South Korea didn't even sign the armistice agreement. It was China and North Korea on one side, and the United States for the United Nations command on the other side. So I think there is. I mean, especially among the older generation, there are families that are separated, that have been separated since the war because of refugee flows and other things, and that generation is getting older. You're right. I think there is a significant difference between the young people, especially in the South, who have known democracy. And I mean, if you're born in 1980s, that would make you a millennial. You understand democracy and free markets. This is what South Korea embraced, and you can see how successful they've been with that. I mean, it's like the 12th or 14th largest economy in the world, and it's not the 12th or 14th most populous country either. I mean, tremendous success. And then, of course, there's even differences in language between the North and South. The hockey teams, the women's hockey team had a hard time communicating because South Korea will willingly take foreign words into the language. For hockey, it's not a native Korean sport. And the North doesn't. They create their own words like the French do. And so they had a hard time communicating.
Good luck, you guys. Zip off to a break. Be right back. So sorry.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Acabona Brake Corporation hired Clintoria Burnett in 2014 at one of its South Carolina automotive brake manufacturing locations as a temporary worker. Burnett is an adherent to the Apostolic Faith Church of God in True Holiness. Her faith requires that she cannot wear pants, and even since she was a small child, she has worn only skirts and dresses. When Burnett received the offer for the job of washer inspector, she was wearing an ankle-length skirt. When she was told that she would have to wear pants to perform her job, the company withdrew their offer of employment. According to the complaint filed by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the company failed to engage in any form of interactive process regarding a religious accommodation for Burnett, and failed to consider any potential accommodation of Burnett's religious beliefs. Once an employer knows of an employee's religion, it is required by law to at least make an effort to accommodate or demonstrate why such an accommodation would work an undue hardship upon the business. Companies often have difficulty staffing positions, and safety regulations can make that task even more difficult. Yet it is vital that companies maintain our national commitment to religious liberty and human dignity by at least trying to find a way to accommodate an employee's religious liberty at the job site. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Debbie Georgatos here, filling in for Kirby Anderson. Point of View, we're speaking with Peter Brooks of the Heritage Foundation, Senior Fellow in National Security Affairs. We're talking about North Korea. Just one last question, and so appreciate your jumping on with me today. So we have troops in South Korea. America has troops, and just right at the demilitarized zone, trying to help keep the peace over there. Isn't that a big piece of keeping North Korea in place, that we just keep our troops there almost indefinitely? I mean, do you think that's a whole part of the answer of making sure that we are keeping close tabs on North Korea?
Well, it's kept the peace since 1953, right? So, I mean, I think it is very, very, very important. I think the South Koreans understand that. It's a very close alliance. We'll have to see how North Korea feels about this. They originally said that they were willing to allow – early on, before this, they were saying that U.S. troops had to leave, obviously. Now they're saying there may be a possibility for U.S. troops. So there's just so much we're going to have to unpack when we get to this summit. So many answers we don't have at this point. We may have them before the summit. We may, but North Korea is very selective about what they say publicly about this. But yes, our brave troops over there are critically important to keeping peace on the peninsula in its terrible state that it is, in the sense that it's an armistice and we don't have a final peace treaty, but yeah, they're critical to that.
And I did notice that when the North and South Carolina, going with the Carolina thing, North and South Korea leaders met, they talked about signing an agreement later in the year, agreeing they're ending their dispute, they're ending their hostilities. So that's in place. That's what they were talking about, ending their hostilities.
Well, they're talking about ending the hostilities. I'm not sure about the individual hostility between the two states, but signing a peace treaty. Yeah, peace treaty to end the war. It's currently an armistice, basically a ceasefire to end that. Whether the hostility between Seoul and Pyongyang will follow is something we could hope for, but that would be a step, I think, possibly a step in the right direction to reducing the tensions between the two sides.
Peter Brooks, thanks so very much for joining us on Point of View.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, folks, it's just so great today. I hope you've enjoyed listening to our different experts. But, I think that all of us who care so much about America and our country, and we read these big stories happening in the world, big episodes, and, you want to be I always say in my show, to be a patriot, you need to understand what the issues facing the country, and what the background stories are. And I want to say in North Korea and South Korea, there is just a need to evaluate this from the perspective, from the kind of prism of freedom in South Korea works. South Korea is a bustling economy. I think he said it's the 12th largest economy, even though it isn't the 12th largest country in terms of population. But freedom works in the world. It works in America. It works around the world. And, it's kind of like you inevitably have to give up ideas that don't work. And that's really what communism is and what socialism is. I don't know. I'm not trying to say that I think that, now that we have this very little baby steps toward peace, that we're going to all of a sudden see North Korea just surrender socialism, surrender communism, agree to become a free country, and agree to allow their people, free egress and ingress and freedom of information, all the things you assume belong in a society. I'm not saying that's going to happen overnight, but I do like the expression, the arc of history or something. I like the message that, the communist countries in the world, which are fewer and fewer in number, but they are failing. And they're failing because communism is an evil, godless, bad idea. And freedom is thriving. Freedom in whether it's South Korea, it's such an amazing comparison because they are, it's one peninsula. There's this a demilitarized zone right through the middle, 38th parallel, and you have the darkness. It's like the darkness versus the light right there in Korea. But I think this is a cause for celebration that at least carefully, cautiously, cautious optimism and not just a immediate surrender of trust. I think that Kim Jong-un has done a lot to make the world question, despise, feel concerned about him. Has been deceptive in the past, so there's no reason to simply agree. He's all of a sudden everything's fine. But I love the message that we are seeing this kind of arc of history. We're seeing freedom winning and repression and evil and godlessness, which is all part of communism, losing. And, I think we all need to, we've been talking today at least more than I usually do in this show, about prayer and about prayer for the world. And this National Day of Prayer is just a great day to remind us, all of us, that we are, we have an obligation as a Christian nation, as people, believers who love the Bible and love God and love Christ, that we actually actively pray for this world. Because if you had told someone at the beginning of the first day of the Trump administration that you would have the North Korean leader making his way to South Korea, which is symbolic by itself, the North Korean leader did not insist the South Korean leader come up to him, but rather the North Korean leader made its way to South Korea. It's a very symbolic, it's not a small thing, it's a decision to say, I'm kind of capitulating. I'm willing to step back. I'm willing to be I'm willing to make the effort. And I just think it's a great cause for celebration in that story. And, we were watching stories of socialism, the misery is caused around the world. The misery is still causing in Venezuela and Cuba, which is still communist. And I love the notion as as proud Americans, we should be proud not just because we happen to be strong and good, but because our nation is a good and noble nation because of the ideas that founded it, because the Judeo-Christian ideas were woven into the roots of America, and because those ideas gave rise to the structure of government that protects individual freedom, protects religious liberty, protects freedom of speech. Those ideas got woven into the creation of America. And those ideas are there for anyone in the world. They can bless anyone in the world. They can bless other nations that are experimenting with liberty. They can, America just kind of, we raised the standard for the world at the time of the creation of our country about what the idea of the rights of the individual are, the rights of freedom, that you have God-given freedom, you have God-given rights, and that a country exists not for the powerful to repress the masses, the peasants, but instead the country exists to give each individual the due God-given honor and due him respect for his God-given identity and right to freedom and to live freely. So these, America's founding and those ideas gave rise to what America is. And as we talk through all our stories tonight, I think there's just a very valuable lesson about holding on to the idea of America, insisting that those ideas are right and they will bless all nations. The idea that in North Korea, this country that has lived in physical darkness with insufficient electricity, insufficient power, insufficient, infrastructure, the country's just lived in a repressed way since its founding, and except for of course the elite. But this idea that we in America can be a kind of a beacon of liberty, we can show people that freedom is better. We can stand up for the ideas that found this country, and watching then the North Korean country apparently begin to bend toward liberty is a really, really beautiful thing, something to celebrate, to be thankful to God for, and to keep supporting in prayer that all the leaders involved in this transition, hopefully out of darkness into light, are inspired with wisdom and clarity as they move forward. So, you know what? We're out of time, only 3 hours, and they just race right by, as happens all the time on radio. But I want to thank you very much for tuning in to Point of View. Urge you to pointofview.net is listener supported, so they need your donations. And come back tomorrow to Point of View every day, and love talking with you. Thanks for listening.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.